Integration Officer at USAdvisors Insurance. Hope you're doing well. Thank you for joining us for this month's Coaching Corner, where we're going to be focusing on underwriting best practices. As you may be aware, underwriting can not only make or break a case, it can actually make or break a relationship. And I think because of this, so many advisors are hesitant to do planning in this area, and I certainly understand that. The last thing we want to do is damage relationships. But if you'll join me for the next 30 minutes or so, we'll be able to share some insights and be able to walk through some of the best practices. I'd like to remind you that to the extent that you know this is important, but you don't want to necessarily do that work yourself, you can certainly leverage me specifically, as most of my work is actually done on a joint work basis. So with that, let's get started. As we described, if we don't set up appropriate expectations, we can really ruin a relationship. And I know some advisors are concerned about that, and I'm concerned about that, right? Our job is really to enhance our relationship with you and your clients. It's not to damage it. But meanwhile, we're going into a highly scrutinized process called underwriting, where our clients are being weighed and measured. And if we don't understand how they're being weighed and how they're being measured and be able to describe that to our clients, we put ourselves at a significant disadvantage. And so if we set up poor expectations, those can lead to poor outcomes. And if we have poor outcomes, we have an erosion of trust. And if we have an erosion of trust, well, now we've got maybe the client looking at us sideways. Maybe they're wondering what you're doing on the portfolio management side of things. Maybe they're shopping us out. And again, we want to avoid that disaster. We just want to protect clients. We want to protect their families. We want to protect their businesses. We want to protect our own AUM. And so where I want to start here is underwriting really does have landmines all over, right? There's a saying that we have in our office that insurance is fun, right? Smiley face. And the reason insurance is fun is that you can run into landmines. But see, the interesting thing about landmines is if you have no idea where they are, you might just find yourself blown up. But if you know where they are, you can navigate around them, right? And so I want to share with you some of the things that we've seen, right? Undisclosed information, just as a general term, is probably the biggest landmine, right? We ask clients how their health is, if they have any diagnoses, if they're on any medications, and their proclivity is to say, I'm in good health. And it's probably because they believe themselves to be in good health. It means their doctor thinks they're in good health. But what they don't understand is they're being weighed and measured in like 50 different categories. And I tell clients that underwriting isn't often a pass or fail, it's a pass and slot. And so you end up getting slotted into different categories, right? This is part of why I rarely, if ever, quote super preferred rates, because what we're doing is setting up an inappropriate expectation in most cases, because something like 5% of all insureds end up with a super preferred rate, right? And what happens, and I see out there, is people will just quote and they won't ask medical questions. So field underwriting is really, really important. Right at the top of that list ends up being tobacco and cannabis. If you ask this question, people will be like, well, I'm a non-smoker. And that may be true, okay? But a non-smoker to an insurance company is someone who's not had one cigarette in the last 12 months. So I went out with buddies and had one cigarette at my buddy's bachelor party. I'm a smoker to insurance companies. So we need to make sure that clients understand that. By the way, we have to have no tobacco generally for 3 years in order to get a preferred rate. So these are spots that are easily catchable. We see this type of thing all the time. And I think what happens twofold is that the advisor isn't maybe asking that question, and then the client isn't always 100% honest. So we want to educate them on what does that mean. The same would be true of cannabis use. Now, what's interesting about tobacco and cannabis is you think of them as one thing, but they're not really one thing. How are we delivering the tobacco? Is it in gum? Is it in a cigarette? Is it in a pipe? Is it chewing tobacco? Is it a vape? Well, all of these things potentially are underwritten differently. And we have sweet spots with carriers where if we understand what clients are really using and how, we may be able to get them to the right spot. Same thing with cannabis. Well, how is that being used? Is that in gummies? Is that vaping? Is that in flower? How often is that being used? Do we have a prescription or don't we? Right, so again, another reason why advisors don't engage this is they sometimes don't want to know this level of detail. And I understand that and I appreciate that. It can be awkward to ask that information. It can be awkward to know that information. candidly, as self-serving as it is, that would be a reason to use an insurance specialist like me to be able to have a little bit of a buffer, not only to set up the right expectations, but to the extent that they have to disclose that sensitive information, like how much they weigh, for example. That continues to be the most difficult question that I ask someone who is heavy, especially a woman, right? And so sensitive conversations, but we have to be courageous and we have to set our clients up for success so that we can get them what they need, we can avoid the landmines, and we can solidify the relationship. Something that I've seen come up is notes in medical records. So what happens is people will mention things to their doctor and forget that they mentioned them, and they might be in the record. Like, I used to do drugs in college. Sometimes that's in a medical record. Well, if that's in a medical record, that could cause a real big problem for us. Other things are, sometimes they say, hey, you know what, we referred you to the doctor because we want to, out of an abundance of caution, we referred you to a different doctor so that you could have some sort of testing done. Well, if we see those medical records and there's testing that needs to be done but is not yet complete, we can't get an approval. Right? So we have to ask, have you had any referrals out to any doctors? Do you have any tests that are pending that are not yet completed, right? And what is in your medical records? Because it depends, even height and weight, right? When they ask you your height and weight, they'll generally ask you, what are your height and weight? Well, if they send a nurse out to see you, they may then get your height and weight there. They go take medical records. Now they see what your height and weight was at your last doctor's office. So sometimes they're blending in averages, right? So these are the things that we need to pay attention to. Recent weight loss comes up a lot. Go, hey, congratulations, you lost 30 pounds this year. That's great. And that is great. But if you lost 30 pounds this year, you go into underwriting, the underwriters are going to add back 50% of the weight that was lost when they determine how much you might weigh. So if people have had significant weight loss, we need to really understand how much did they lose over what period of time. And we need to understand that there's likely going to be an add back in weight. By the way, why is there an add back? That's because actuarially, most people who lose weight end up gaining some back, right? And so never forget that when we go into underwriting, what we're trying to do is present our client in the best light at that exact time. And so we want to really understand these things. Recent change in medication. This can be nothing, or this could be everything in a case, right? So I tell people that generically insurance companies don't like things that are recent or unknown. I had something going on in my stomach. I'm not really sure what it was. I went to the doctor. He said I'm probably fine, but he couldn't diagnose me. And in fact, he said he wants another test done. Well, you know what that means in insurance land? That person is probably uninsurable right now because whatever happened was too recent. It was just last month, and it's unknown. There's no formal diagnosis, right? So a recent change in medication can be problematic, like if the medication we're using for our diabetes just got a higher dose. Oh, they just raised that dose? Why don't we go on pause for 6 months? So there's something called a postponement. So a postponement isn't a decline, it's just a failure to offer. And so they'll failure to offer if we have a procedure that's not yet done. They'll fail to offer if they don't like the change in medication. Okay, so these are just things that we need to be aware of, and we need to tell clients about. Because if they get the telephone call and they go, well, what's going on? And then they feel, in my words, they feel discriminated against. It's very easy to feel picked on through an underwriting process. So part of that is we want to be able to let them know that they are effectively being picked on. Here's how you're being weighed and measured. Here's the way to think about it. Doctors' offices are slow. Now, if you've used simplified underwriting processes, a lot of times we don't have to go to doctors' offices anymore, probably half the time. That's really, really good because we can get much quicker underwriting approvals. We also don't run the risk of something being in those records that we're unaware of or that we forgot about. But I'll tell you, where cases run long being 2 months to a year, very unlikely to go through underwriting for a year, but it isn't unprecedented. 2 to 6 months, where that goes is we send out to the doctor's office and they move slowly. And it took them several weeks or maybe even a month to get us the attending physician statement. And inside that, we see that we went out to 2 other doctors, and now we got to go to those 2 other doctors. And so it's almost like pulling a sweater. And so if you have somebody who has multiple doctors and has an extensive health history, not only should you not just be going into underwriting, you should be working with us and our team. We're going to talk a little bit about, again, how we do that on the back end. But you've got to let people know this might run long. And then also try to engage them to perhaps obtain some of their own medical records themselves. A lot of people are using MyChart now. That can be very advantageous and can often be a substitute from having to go get real medical records. What I really want you to hear, and you're going to hear it again, is that the more of a health history somebody has, the more important it is to really understand exactly what that is before we go into underwriting, because we need to get into underwriting with the right company. We need to quote the right thing. We might need to put together the right cover letter. And again, we're going to talk a little bit about how we do that strategically on the back end here. Poor driving records, this can get you bankruptcies, right? They pull a DMV report, and they pull a report generally from LexisNexis. So that's going to be background information, including bankruptcies, poor credit, and poor driving record. Certainly if we have DUIs, that is a very significant issue, and we need to really understand, when did they have it? Did they go to treatment? Was anyone harmed? Did they have multiple events? It ends up in a series of, well, what about this question, this question, this question? That's what I mean when I say pull the sweater. Sometimes what they'll do is they'll just pull the whole sweater off, and then somebody's there effectively naked, right? Nobody likes to be naked when they don't need to be, right? So we've got to be stewards for our clients on this. I already mentioned the tested procedures. I recently had somebody who rushed through their cognitive exam. So oftentimes if you're 70 years or older and you're applying for long-term care coverage, they're going to conduct some sort of cognitive exam. Well, if you're going to conduct a cognitive exam and you're going to be distracted or rush through it, that's not going to be good. And I had one of those recently. And the reality is that if someone does not have the time or is not in the right space, we need to tell people to reschedule that. Because again, why? We're presenting ourselves one time to an insurance company, one time. And what we need to do is we need to present ourselves as favorably as possible. And the best way to do that is to understand how we're being weighed, how we're being measured, and what we need to be thinking about, right? Foreign travel can be an issue, not an automatic issue. You go into Mexico for vacation, almost certainly not a problem, right? But we're going to the bush in Africa for 3 weeks on a mission trip. That could be a very big issue. Where are we staying? What are we doing? What testing have we done? Did we get inoculated? Different things. So again, a lot of times there's more questions than answers, and that's where the field underwriting comes in. The insurance company is going to ask all these questions. We need to ask most of these questions up front so that we're not surprised. So there's that bankruptcy and that foreign travel. So again, just landmines all over. So behind the scenes though, we have over 50 companies we work with. And there's a saying that you can find riches in niches. Well, there's a big overlap in how company A underwrites and company B underwrites. There's no doubt about it. But these companies have these little sweet spots where they like to be competitive, where somebody might be more aggressive, meaning more allowable to heart issues, and somebody else might be more allowable to diabetes issues. Some of the top of our list here is that Banner has a great build chart. That means if you have somebody who's a little short for their weight, Banner might be a place to look because they're a little more liberal. They'll allow you to be a little bit heavier. That would be one example. John Hancock is one of our most favorable companies for those that are diabetic. Right? Diabetes, the things we really need to pay attention to is, are we on insulin or not? What's our most recent A1C level? But what's our highest A1C level? They're often blending 2 or 3 years of A1C levels together. How about our weight? Have we maintained it or not? Are we type 1 or type 2? So again, it's not, are you diabetic or not? If you're diabetic, we need a bunch of information. By the way, I'm going to share with you a couple of health forms that we use to suss this out ahead of time. Lincoln, Symetra, and Securian are favorable for THC or cannabis use. Now again, they're all over the board with regard to what's being used and how often. Can we have a positive test or not? So these are all things that you don't want to find out through underwriting. You want to get ahead of them. And again, we help navigate this. Generically, we navigate this in sort of 4 ways: education, then preparation, then strategy, and negotiation. So let's walk through that. I've alluded to some of these already on here. So education, we're going to let clients know, hey, when you sign this application, what you're doing is you're allowing the insurance company to underwrite you, and you're expressly letting them go to the DMV to grab your driving record. They're going to go to the prescription database to grab all of your prescriptions, right? They're going to go to do some sort of background check, usually through Lexis for bankruptcy, any criminal issues. Just want you to be aware that that's what's going to happen. By the way, they don't tell you this, but there's sort of an embedded honesty test inside of this, right? Why do they need to ask you what medications you're on if they're going to hit the prescription database, right? They want to be able to match up and validate that. I had a client recently tell me that he felt that the insurance company was all but calling him a liar. And I really understand where he was coming from, because he's like, I already told you that. And so it can be problematic if we don't let clients know that the underwriting process can be painful and intrusive, and don't take it personally, right? And they go, well, my doctor says I'm in great shape. Why are they giving me a table 2 rating, right? That's a tough conversation to navigate. But understand that your doctor says you're okay, and you are, but they're not really underwriting you, Mr. Client, individually. They're underwriting you and putting you in a bucket with other 1,000 people just like you. So for example, if 1,000 of you do not have the ailment that you've just shared with me that you have, and a second 1,000 have it, would it be your opinion that those 2 buckets of 1,000 and 1,000 would be of equal risk? Or would one maybe be of higher risk than the other? And they go, oh, I get it. So part of this is understanding that it feels so personal, and it certainly is. We're being weighed and measured, but it really isn't personal. It's about actuarial science. It's about risk management and placing them in the right buckets. And so again, by having an expectation conversation, that can go a long way when you get the call and the call says, boy, that was painful. And when they say, boy, that was painful, you know what we get to say? We get to say, I'm very sorry for your pain. If you recall, we discussed that, right? So we don't have our tail between our legs, right? We're ahead of it. Right? So at education, they're going to hit national databases. They're going to ask you to attest to your health history. So health and lifestyle questions. Have you ever done any of the following? Have you ever had any ailments in the last 10 years? Are you jumping out of planes? These are the things they're going to be asking you. It's possible, depending on the company and the process, that they might obtain your medical records for the last 10 years. If they do that, can you think of anything that might be in those medical records that might have them potentially concerned or looking at you sideways, right? And then help them understand that we're brokers, okay? I believe that our average client is a very ethical, successful, honest person. I believe that. I also believe people's tendency is to not share the things that they think they're gonna be weighed and measured on. They tend to be close. And so from an education standpoint, I like to tell them, listen, if you're like other clients, you might tend to keep this stuff close to your vest. It's personal information. A lot of it is HIPAA protected. And I certainly understand and appreciate that. What I'd like to ask of you, Mr. and Mrs. Klein, is please be as straightforward with me as you can. Because you're not formally applying with me, my job is twofold. Number one is what we've already gone through, which is helping understand what you need, figuring out what you have in force, what kind of gap you have, educating you on your options. Now you're ready to take action. Now my second part of my job kicks in, where I got to turn around and I've got to play matchmaker to get you to the right company and the right product. And in order to do so, I really need to understand what these companies are going to see when we bring you to them. And so with your permission, do you mind if I ask you some pretty sensitive questions, right? Do you mind if I send you a detailed health questionnaire? We want to do this ahead of just applying and then praying, right? That's really, I mean, sometimes that'll work out well. And you know what, if you're dealing with a 25-year-old who's in the picture of health, that may not be of concern. We start getting people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s for sure, especially with some health history, this becomes all the more important. And so So there's been occasions, even after setting all of this up, it's happened to me more than a handful of times that we go into underwriting, I've done the pre-screen and somebody got declined anyways. And you know why they got declined? They got declined because the client didn't tell me something that was important, like literally. Like, oh, you didn't tell me about the cancer diagnosis 3 years ago, even though I asked you. I'm going to be careful about this, but people don't want to be measured, so they hold it close, but then I can't help you. And that's my point about the help me help you. Now, as a professional, that one kind of upsets me when that happens because I take a lot of care to set this up. I have now, at this point, I've put in 4 or 5 hours in educating these people, pulling together quotes, making recommendations, go all the way through underwriting, only to be declined on something I could have told them that they were going to be declined on, but they didn't share it. And so this is where it's sensitive. And back to the very first thing I said, underwriting is a big reason, in my opinion, why a lot of our advisors aren't doing more in this area. But we can mitigate that risk significantly through this type of process. Also let them know that we have an informal underwriting process. I call that I got a guy or I got a gal. We don't want to just go apply with John Hancock if we know something might be a stray or borderline. What we want to do is we want to go through what they call an informal inquiry, where we can go out to a handful of carriers and say, I've got a guy. I'm not telling you his name. Here's how old he is. Here's what you're going to see if we bring him to you. Here's his history. Will you give us an informal offer? And we can go out and get quick quotes from these companies, and we can compile the 5 best companies and figure out how they're likely to approve. Now, that's not a binding quote, but it helps a lot. Not only does it give us the market intelligence that we need inside of the market, it also helps us select a carrier to use. And by the way, that offer does come in writing with an asterisk that says pending full underwriting. But that helps when we go through underwriting and they approve them somewhere less than what they said they would approve them. We send them that quick quote and say, wait a minute, you told us this. It does matter. And it is a higher degree of accountability for those companies. And so that's very important to do. So that's the education piece. So that would be like client focused by helping them know what's going to happen and then help them be prepared, right? So educating on what's happening, but understand, hey, if you need a paramedical exam, a couple things need to happen, right? Number one, no alcohol for 24 hours. This is, again, where we have one shot. I've had people like have a paramed done after they went to Vegas for the weekend. Well, that is very bad idea, very bad idea. If you're having a paramed, what you need is you need to make sure that you're not drinking for 24 hours. You need to not eat for 12 hours. The longer you can fast, the better. If I'm having a paramed this morning, which I generally recommend parameds in the morning when we're calm, when we're fasted, last night, not a big steak. Let's have some chicken last night, low fat, no working out, no coffee, right? So again, just preparing them to present themselves in the best light. If they need a paramed, there's certain best practices for that. If they need a phone interview, well, what are they interviewing on? Is it a cognitive exam? Is it just a health exam? They're going to ask about doctor's information and prescriptions. So let's have that handy, right? Let's be calm. Let's be engaged and don't rush. A lot of people, might try to jam this in and they're in the car. That's just not best practice. That's going to put them in a position of weakness, perhaps. And so the actionable item here is that if we're not ready, we're not prepared, let's move it, okay? Yes, we want to be efficient through underwriting, but if today's a bad day or you're not feeling well or you're stressed out or something's going on with your kid, let's move this because you got one shot at presenting yourself to the insurance company. Doctor's records, I sort of alluded to this. What I find is it's somewhat magical if the client can go to the doctor's office and say, hey, can you get this for us? They move a lot quicker than when we do it. So especially if I have multiple health histories, we'll engage the client. Would you mind putting a call into the doctor's office, either ask them to release it or see if they'll release it to you, right? We can pull a lot of info from my charts. What I will tell you is less and less times are we needing full medical records. The proliferation of accelerated underwriting and hitting these national databases and even having my charts, which is often abbreviated, can satisfy a lot more than it ever was. 10 years ago, you probably always needed paramedical exams. When I started in this business 25 years old, 25 years ago, which was about 25 years old, ironically, almost every time we needed that, I would schedule the paramed right at the same time that I was taking an application. I think if we get 5 or 10 more years into the future, I think it's going to become more and more less and less common to actually have to obtain the medical records themselves, right? Insurance companies are getting a lot better, again, at what they call accelerated underwriting processes. Okay, so we got to educate and prepare the client. Then on the back end, I've alluded to this again, what is our strategy? Which carriers should we look at? You know, John Kim on our team was an underwriter for years. He's a great resource for us. Say, hey, John, will you take a look at this file? What do you think? Is this a yes? Is this a no? Is this a maybe? What companies should we look at, right? So he's sort of our first line of defense, if you will. Then we can go into the carriers themselves and do that quick quote process that I described. We can leverage our wholesalers as we need to, right? We are all in the relationship business. And so there are occasions where we can get movement on approvals based on our previous production and relationships with companies, okay? Then we have to ask ourselves, how do we favorably present this case, right? Underwriters sort of have their own language, and so we need to speak their language. So this is where we can put together a cover letter under some circumstances that says, here's what you're going to see, but here's the context by which I want you to see it, Mr. or Mrs. Underwriter. Here's why we believe that this is a standard risk. Will you tell us what you think? Then we have to decide, should we apply with multiple companies at once? We have to be careful there, especially on smaller cases, because it's more intensive and more paperwork. You have to do multiple processes, but sometimes that might be the best thing to do so that we can obtain the best offer and candidly create a little bit of competition for the insurance companies. So again, these would be things that we have to decide what that strategy is. And then sometimes it's just not the right time to apply for the coverage, you know? I say, listen, we can apply right now, but we may want to consider waiting. Now, there's risks to waiting. Age and health can change, but sometimes depending on what's happening, maybe it's not the best time. You know, maybe we really ought to pen this to after Labor Day, for example. And a lot of this will come up when they go, well, you know what, I have a checkup and I need that checkup. And so, well, maybe we ought not apply today, because if we apply today, we might get what? We might get that postponement. But if we're blind to all of this, and we just showed quotes and they said yes, and we said sign here, now we're just going to see what happens, right? And that's not going to put us in a good spot. And then part of that strategy is the negotiation. We indicated underwriters speak their own language. We need to try to speak their language, not vice versa, right? They're not really trying to speak our language, and then we don't even know what their language is. So we're translators, and that's why this is important. And as I described, we can speak their language. We can utilize and leverage the relationships that we have as well. So we do have some great resources that I want to share. I'll pull this down in a minute here, but we have pre-underwriting questionnaires. I'm going to show you one that I use. It's like a 3-page form. It's basically a generic application, generic health questionnaire. I like to send that out ahead of time and have them complete that so that I can look for any red flags and drill in if I need to. NALBA has a huge field underwriting guide. It's like 260 pages long. I'm going to show you that a little bit. A lot of beautiful things in there as far as expectation, a huge amount of health questionnaires. So there's a questionnaire for almost any ailment that you would have. We've referenced that we do have in-house underwriters, not only on our team, but ultimately at Gallagher, which is sort of our upline for a lot of our contracts. They're a huge organization. Last I checked, maybe top 5 organization in the country. They have a lot of good resources we can tap into as well. I do find myself sharing this cheat sheet on preferred versus standard, which I'm going to walk you through quickly. We're going to go through these in the next 5 minutes or so, and then we can wrap this thing up. Okay. So let's see what we can do. So here's the preferred versus standard cheat sheet. If you want any of these, reach out to me, reach out to Andrew, reach out to Corey. But what I did is I just put together a cheat sheet on generically, how do we get a preferred versus standard rating? Because I get a lot of questions on this, so I just decided to formalize this page. What does it mean for health and medical history? What about age and gender? Medical history, smoking and tobacco use, lifestyle and occupation, driving record, blood work, BMI, substance abuse, etc. Right? So just, again, it's just a nice piece. This is going to be used for people that are in great health, but we don't really know, are they going to get preferred? They're going to get standard, maybe they're going to get super preferred. So this is something to look at. Here's the pre-underwriting authorization that I use for me on my team. So this is generic info on who the producer is. It's generic info on the client history, what kind of coverage. Do they have tobacco use? Are they using marijuana or the like? Who's their primary care physician? What other physicians have they consulted in the last 5 years and why? What other hospital or clinics have they been treated on? Listing all medications, giving family history. The thing that kills us on family history is like premature deaths prior to age 60 of natural causes. That can be a problem. Then if there is any need to go deeper, we've got this next section. Maybe we have coronary disease. Well, what does that look like? Give me more details. What about cancer, diabetes, mental disorder? I'm seeing this with young people in their 20s and 30s. There's a lot of those that are on medication for anxiety or depression. We really need to understand what kind of medication are they on? How long have they been on it? Have they ideated bad thoughts? Have they ever attempted on their life? Have they ever been hospitalized? So a lot of these things aren't a yes or no, it's a yes and then we need to drill down. Sleep apnea comes out a lot. Right? Have we had a sleep study done? Did we sleep through the night? Are we compliant with doctor's orders? Are we doing any hazardous activities? How's our driving record? Okay. So this is the sheet I personally use. Okay. Now here's that NALBA field underwriting guide, 265 pages. We could do a whole day on everything that's here. But what I want you to see, I just pulled it up to the table of contents. They've got health impairment forms. That's almost 80 pages of health impairment forms. So that's where you can drill deep because they had a history of breast cancer. Here's the exact questions that you need, right? General use questionnaire, there's other questionnaires in here. Then, just like I described here in 30 minutes, they have a whole breakdown of what they think their best practices are. So these are really great tools for you. If you want them, please reach out to one of us and we will get them to you. So with that, in the last couple of minutes, what I want to do is I want to share a case study, okay? And so Andrew on my team is paying a lot of attention, not that I'm not, but in this area. And he shared this with me and it seems just really amazing when I really look at this. So here's an example for somebody who wants to do some estate planning, wants to transfer wealth to future generations. The people who buy the largest life insurance policies are often those people who don't specifically need the life insurance, but they may want the life insurance. And here's why they might want it. So here's a male 70 and a female 69. And what we're doing here is we're buying a $1 million second to die policy with John Hancock. The annual premium for that policy is $20,000, $204 annually. So $20,000 a year buys $1 million. By the way, is that a good deal or a bad deal? And I'm going to share with you some math, but the answer to that is it depends how many times they have to pay $20,000, right? Because we can calculate something called internal rate of return. So the normal way to buy $1 million policy would be to pay $20,000 a year on this basis. But we have a product out there right now, competitive in space, but there's multiple products that can do this, Athena Cent Pro, where we can take a $264,000 contribution one time, and that will create an annual income of $20,000, $204 over the life of both the husband and wife. And so what's interesting is maybe this client doesn't pay $20,000 a year, but rather repositions $264,000 of their dollars. And by doing so over 20 years, if they were paying the $20,000 a year for 20 years, they would put in $404,000. But here we're only have to put in $264. So you get this huge leverage point. And not only that, should an early death occur, you have the remaining value of the annuity in addition to the death benefit that's paid. So let me give you an example of the internal rate of return, ignoring the fact that we would fund it with a one-time lump sum annuity. So John Hancock has this page in all of their illustrations, which I really like. And what this is this orange is talking about what's the rate of return on the death benefit. So this is assuming the $20,000 a year going in. It's ignoring the fact that we might have single premium funded this. But what you're seeing here is that if we go here on this chart, in year one, if we put $20,000 in this and they pass away and $1 million gets paid to their heirs, that return is 4,849% return. This is a non-correlated asset. None of their other assets are going to produce anywhere near this. Now, yes, they have to die to get it, so that's odd. Secondly, they're almost certainly not dying in the first year because they were underwritten, but it's possible. By the way, in a 35% tax bracket, the taxable equivalent on that is 7,400%. Now, I realize that's extreme, but it can happen, it has happened, and it will happen, that some clients will write $20,000 check and $1 million will go to their heirs on an income tax-free basis. But look at this gray area. This is actually the life expectancy of these individuals. So that's 25 years in. We've paid $20,000 a year for 25 years. We have $1 million death benefit. The return on that death benefit is 4.92%. That's a 25% return of 5% tax-free. That's pretty good. People are often say that insurance is too expensive. $20,000 a year, you're crazy. Well, it doesn't cost us $20,000 a year. That's what we have to contribute. It's a dollars in and dollars out. If over 25 years we put $20,000 in 25 times, we get $1 million out, we have a 4.92% return in a very safe environment. That's a pre-tax equivalent of 7.56. So when this strategy is understood correctly with or without the funding of the annuity, this is really an asset class conversation. And by the way, what if they pass away 15 years from now? Do you have any clients that passed away by age 85? Because I bet you do. Well, if these clients were to pass away at 85, we have a 13.89% return tax-free. That might well be the single best performing asset in the entire portfolio. So it's just something to consider. A lot of people are throwing out insurance because it costs too much and they don't need it. But these clients, instead of funding a single premium, maybe this is from their RMD that they wish they didn't have to take. Right? Take an RMD and reposition it into insurance. Okay, if I inherit an IRA, Rod Crandall inherits a parent's IRA, that's the worst asset for me to inherit because of the 10-year rule. I'd much rather inherit life insurance, which is what? Cash. Life insurance is cash. And some of your best clients may have plenty of dollars, but lack some of the liquidity at death that they might need. And utilizing an insurance policy, especially a second to die policy, can make a lot of sense. And so if you've been around me at all, you know that I really believe in clients and advisors considering these strategies and becoming educated on them. And then they can decide whether it ought to be part of their portfolio or not. So with that, wrapping up, where do we go from here? Well, we have our next Coach's Corner in July. Corey Husfeldt on my team does the Hutsville huddles every 2 months. So I'm here in April. He's going to do May and June, and then I'm going to hop back in July. Please reach out to Andrew or Corey or myself if you have questions, you want to see any of these resources, or you have any cases. As always, we're around doing the right thing. When we do that, we drive revenue to our practices, we protect AUM, and we create competitive immunity. So lastly, I would just put our contact info here. You've got Corey, you've got Andrew, and you've got myself. And with that, I appreciate you guys. I'll end like we end our Monday morning meetings, which are let's be good leaders, let's help clients, and let's drive revenue. So appreciate your time, and make it a great day and enjoy the spring. Take care, everyone.